In the beginning, there was a kind of quiet that did not ask to be noticed. It lived in the corners of a small room, in the pauses between breaths, in the soft moments before sleep. It was the kind of quiet that arrives when something important is missing, but no one has yet found the words to name it. The boy learned this quiet early, not because anyone taught him, but because life placed it gently in his hands and waited to see what he would do with it. There were no familiar voices calling his name at dusk, no steady footsteps returning at night, only the slow rhythm of time passing and the feeling of being left behind by something he could not remember clearly, yet felt every day. Have you ever felt a silence that felt heavier than sound? A silence that did not shout but stayed? That was the silence that watched him grow. It followed him as he learned to sit still, to listen, to notice things others passed by without seeing. The way light rested on the floor in the morning, the way the air changed before the rain came, the way his own thoughts felt louder when the world around him was quiet. He did not cry often, not because he was strong and not because he was weak. He simply did not know who would hear him, and so the tears stayed inside, becoming something else, something slower, something deeper. Over time, that quiet sadness turned into observation. He watched people carefully, studying how words moved between them, how emotions rose and fell like waves. Sometimes he wondered if silence was a kind of punishment. Other times, he felt it was a shelter. When there is no one to speak to, you learn to speak inwardly. You learn to sit with your feelings instead of pushing them away. You learn that not every moment needs a response. At night, when the world rested, he lay awake and listened to the sound of his own breathing. It was steady, reliable. It reminded him that even when everything else felt uncertain, something within him remained. In those moments, he did not feel important or special. He simply felt present. And perhaps that was enough. There were questions he never asked aloud. Why did this happen? Why was he here and not somewhere else? Why did others seem to belong so easily while he stood quietly at the edge? The questions stayed unanswered, but they did not disappear. They became part of the silence too, shaping it, giving it weight and meaning. The quiet taught him patience before he knew the word for it. It taught him that feelings can be carried without being displayed, that pain does not always need to be explained to be real, and that sometimes the strongest moments are the ones no one sees. As the days passed, the silence did not leave, but it changed. It softened. It became familiar, like an old companion walking beside him. It no longer felt empty. It felt full of things waiting to be understood. This was how his story began, not with noise or attention, but with stillness. Not with answers, but with questions held gently. In that quiet beginning, something important was forming. Something patient, something watchful, something that would one day know the difference between reacting to the world and understanding it. And though no one noticed at the time, the silence was already shaping him, teaching him how to stand without being seen, how to feel without being heard, and how to carry a quiet strength long before he ever knew he would need it. The room he lived in did not echo. Sounds entered it softly and seemed to disappear before they could return. It was a place where even footsteps felt careful, as if the walls themselves preferred stillness. In that quiet space, the boy spent long hours alone, learning how silence can become a language of its own. At first, the silence felt awkward. It pressed against him, asking questions he did not yet know how to answer. When he moved, he noticed how small his movements were. When he spoke, his voice surprised him, as if it had been resting for too long. So he spoke less. He listened more, not because he was told to, but because the room seemed to invite it. Have you ever noticed how silence can make thoughts feel louder? In that room, his thoughts had nowhere to hide. They drifted slowly, one after another, sometimes heavy, sometimes gentle. Memories he barely understood came and went. Feelings appeared without warning, stayed for a while, then faded. With no one to interrupt them, he learned to sit with them. There were moments when the quiet felt uncomfortable. It made him aware of what he lacked. of what was missing. Other rooms, he imagined, might be filled with voices, with laughter, with arguments that ended in warmth. His room offered none of that. It offered space. And space, he learned, can be both a gift and a burden. He began to notice small details, the way the air felt cooler near the window, the soft patterns of light that shifted across the walls as the day moved on, the sounds that came from far away, never staying long enough to feel close. These details became his companions, steady and predictable in a way people were not. Sometimes he wondered if the room understood him. It never demanded anything. It never asked him to explain himself. In its quiet, he felt allowed to be exactly as he was. He could sit without purpose. He could think without conclusion. He could feel without needing to act. In that stillness, he learned something important without realizing it. Not every feeling needs to be shown. Not every thought needs to be spoken. Some things grow better in silence, like roots beneath the soil, unseen but slowly strengthening. When discomfort arose, he did not push it away. There was nowhere for it to go, so he stayed with it. He felt its shape, its weight. Over time, it lost some of its sharpness. It became familiar, and familiarity, he discovered, brings a quiet kind of courage. He listened to the world from a distance. Voices passed by, sometimes kind, sometimes careless. He noticed how easily words could wound, even when they were not meant to. From the safety of his quiet room, he watched without stepping forward. He learned restraint before he learned its value. There were days when he wished the room would speak back to him, that it would offer answers or comfort in a clearer way. But it never did. Instead, it offered consistency. The silence was always there, waiting, steady and unchanged. Slowly, the boy stopped fearing the quiet. He began to trust it. In that trust, something settled within him. His emotions became calmer, not because they were weaker, but because they were understood. He no longer rushed to escape discomfort. He allowed it to pass in its own time. That room, with its lack of echoes, taught him how to hold himself together without noise. It taught him how to listen, not just to the world, but to his own inner movements. And though it seemed like nothing was happening, something was quietly forming. In the stillness, patience took root. Emotional discipline began its gentle work, and without realizing it, the boy was being prepared for moments beyond that room, moments where silence would become not a place, but a choice. As time passed, the boy began to step beyond the quiet room more often. Not far, not boldly, but just enough to be seen. And when he was seen, the silence that lived within him was noticed too. People observed the way he watched more than he spoke, the way his eyes lingered while his words remained few. They tried to understand him, but understanding silence is never easy. They filled the quiet with their own meanings. Some thought he was distant. Others believed he did not care. A few assumed there was nothing inside him at all. Their thoughts were not spoken softly. They drifted toward him in careless tones, in glances that lasted too long, in judgments formed too quickly. The boy heard them even when they thought he did not. Have you ever felt misunderstood without knowing how to correct it? He felt it often. There was a gentle ache that came with realizing that people saw only the surface. They mistook his calm for emptiness, his restraint for weakness, his silence for absence, and each misunderstanding settled quietly inside him, adding weight to the stillness he carried. At first he wondered if he should change, if he should speak more, explain himself, prove that there was depth beneath the quiet. He practiced words in his mind, imagining how they might sound if released. But when the moment came, the words felt heavy, not because they were untrue, but because they felt unnecessary. He sensed that explanations given to those who were not listening would only fade into more noise. So he stayed as he was, and in doing so he became even more misunderstood. They watched him closely now, measuring him by what he did not say. Some felt uneasy around his silence, as if it reflected something they preferred not to face with themselves. Others dismissed him entirely, turning away with easy certainty. The boy noticed all of it. He noticed how quickly people grew uncomfortable when they could not place someone into a familiar shape. There were moments when the misunderstanding hurt more than loneliness ever had. Loneliness was quiet and honest. Misunderstanding felt sharper. It made him question himself. Was there something wrong with being this way? Was silence truly a flaw? These questions came late at night, lingering longer than he wished. Yet even in doubt, he observed. He watched how those who spoke the most were not always the most certain. He noticed how loud reactions often hid fragile emotions. He began to see that misunderstanding was not always born from cruelty, but from fear of what could not be controlled or explained. He learned that silence makes some people restless. It invites assumptions. It asks them to fill the space with their own thoughts. And those thoughts often reveal more about them than about the quiet person before them. The boy did not argue with what they believed. He did not defend himself or correct their stories. Instead, he carried their words gently, examining them in private. He kept what felt true and let the rest pass through him without settling. This was not easy. It required patience he did not always feel he possessed. There were days when he wished someone would see him clearly without needing him to perform or explain, someone who would understand. And that silence can be full, that calm can hold strength. But that understanding did not arrive, not yet. In its absence, he found something else. He found self-awareness. Through being misunderstood, he came to know himself more deeply. When the world reflected a distorted image back to him, he learned to look inward for clarity. He learned that how he saw himself mattered more than how he was perceived. The misunderstandings did not disappear. They remained lingering at the edges of his life, but they no longer defined him. He carried his silence with steadier hands now, not as a shield but as a truth. And in that quiet endurance, something subtle changed. He stopped needing to be understood by everyone. He began to understand himself, and that understanding, though invisible to them, settled into him like a calm certainty, preparing him for a choice he would one day make, to let silence speak for him, even when the world listened poorly. There came a time when the boy stopped waiting for the world to explain itself to him. The misunderstandings still lingered, but they no longer felt like wounds that needed tending. Instead, they became quiet signs pointing him inward. In the stillness that followed, something began to shift. It did not happen suddenly. There was no clear moment when everything made sense. The realization arrived slowly, like dawn light moving across a dark room. At first, he only felt a gentle change in the way he listened to his own thoughts. He noticed that some of them asked for attention, while others simply passed by, leaving no trace. He began to see that not every feeling was asking to be expressed. Some were asking to be understood. There was a difference, and it mattered more than he had ever known. When he allowed himself to sit with his emotions without naming them too quickly, they softened. They revealed their true shape. Have you ever noticed how clarity often comes when you stop searching for it? The boy found that answers appeared when he no longer demanded them. In the quiet moments between one breath and the next, he felt a steady presence within himself. It was not loud or proud. It did not rush to defend or explain. It simply remained. He realized then that silence was not something that happened to him. It was something he carried. It was not a lack, but a space. And within that space, he could choose what to hold and what to release. He thought about the words that had been spoken about him, how easily they had shaped his doubts. He saw now that reacting to them would only give them more life. A response would not bring understanding. It would only add more sound to a world already full of it. So he began to listen differently. When something stirred inside him, anger or sadness or confusion, he did not push it outward. He let it stay. He observed it with patience, as one might watch a passing cloud. He noticed how even strong emotions eventually changed when left alone. This was the unspoken lesson, the one no one had given him, but that silence had taught him over time. Inner peace was not found by correcting others, but by becoming steady within oneself. Strength did not always show itself through action. Sometimes it revealed itself through restraint. The boy understood that he could not control how they saw him, but he could choose how deeply their views entered his heart. This understanding brought a quiet relief. He felt lighter, as if he had been carrying a burden he was never meant to hold. In this realization, his posture changed, though no one noticed. His gaze became calmer, his presence more settled. He no longer felt the need to fill every pause or explain every silence. He trusted that what mattered would remain, even without words. There were still moments of doubt. He was human, after all. But now, when doubt arose, it did not take control. It became another thing to observe, another visitor in the quiet space within him. And like the others, it eventually left. He began to sense a quiet power growing inside him, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that endures. It came from knowing himself without needing approval, from understanding that silence could be a choice, not a retreat. As night fell and the world grew still, he felt at ease in ways he had not before. The quiet no longer felt heavy or uncertain. It felt clear. It felt honest. In that clarity, he knew something important had changed. He did not need to announce it. He did not need to act on it right away. The realization was enough. It settled deep within him, preparing him for moments ahead, when silence would not just be his nature, but his decision. The moments that tested him most were not loud or dramatic. They arrived quietly, disguised as small provocations, careless words, or looks that lingered a moment too long. These were the moments that asked for a reaction. And once, he would have felt the pull to answer them, even if only to himself. Now he paused. He noticed the space between what was said and what stirred inside him. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. In that space lived a choice. He felt the familiar rise of emotion, the warmth in his chest, the tightening of thought. And instead of moving with it, he stayed still. Have you ever felt how quickly a reaction can escape, almost before you realize it is happening? He felt that speed too. But he also felt something slower beneath it, something steadier. He learned to rest his attention there. When words reached him that were sharp or dismissive, he did not rush to soften them or throw them back. He let them pass through the quiet he had built inside. He listened, not to agree or submit, but to understand the shape of what was being offered. Often he found that the words carried more about the one who spoke them than about him. This understanding did not come with pride. It came with calm. He realized that reacting would not bring him closer to truth. It would only pull him into a moment that would soon fade, leaving behind echoes he did not need. There were times when silence felt like effort, when holding back felt heavier than speaking out. In those moments, he reminded himself that not every feeling demands action. Some ask only to be felt and released. He stayed with the discomfort until it loosened its grip. They noticed his quiet. Some took it as permission to say more. Others mistook it for surrender. The boy saw these misunderstandings clearly now, and still he did not respond. Not out of fear, but out of intention. His silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was chosen. He began to see how reactions shape paths quickly, often without thought. One word answered with another could turn into something lasting, something regretted. By choosing not to react, he allowed moments to end naturally without adding weight to them. There was a strange freedom in this restraint. He felt less controlled by the world around him, less pulled by every passing opinion. His inner world grew quieter, not because it was suppressed, but because it was respected. Sometimes, late at night, he reflected on moments he had allowed to pass without response. He did not feel small for them. He felt intact, whole, as if he had protected something fragile and important within himself. He realized that silence could be an answer, not one meant to punish or distance, but one meant to preserve peace. It said, without sound, that he did not need to participate in everything offered to him, that his attention was valuable. Have you ever noticed how calm can unsettle those who expect reaction? He noticed it too. His quiet often left space where tension expected resistance, and in that space things softened, or they revealed themselves more clearly. The boy did not see this as winning or losing. He saw it as choosing himself. Each moment of restraint strengthened something unseen. His self-respect grew, steady and quiet, rooted in the knowledge that he could feel deeply without being ruled by those feelings. He was not avoiding life. He was meeting it carefully, with awareness, with patience, with a silence that listened before it spoke. And though no one announced it, this choice began to shape his future. Each time he chose not to react, he reclaimed a piece of himself. Each time he stayed quiet, he grew more grounded. In this way, silence became more than absence. It became direction, a gentle, guiding presence that helped him move through the world without losing his center, teaching him that true strength often reveals itself not in response, but in restraint. As the days continued, something within the boy began to settle into a deeper rhythm. The effort it once took to remain quiet slowly faded. What had been restraint became natural. His silence no longer felt like something he carried carefully. It felt like something that carried him. There was a strength growing inside him, but it did not anew. NCE itself. It did not rise suddenly or demand recognition. It formed quietly, shaped by moments no one else noticed, by words he chose not to answer, by emotions he allowed to pass without being acted upon. Have you ever sensed a strength that makes no sound? A strength that does not push forward but stands firm? He began to feel it then, not as confidence meant to impress, but as a calm assurance that did not need to be tested. When difficulties appeared, he met them differently now. His first response was no longer reaction, but awareness. He felt what arose inside him, acknowledged it, and let it settle before moving on. This pause became his anchor. In it he found clarity. They still spoke. They still misunderstood at times. But their words did not travel as far within him as they once had. They touched the surface and fell away. What remained was his sense of self, steady and unshaken. He noticed that his presence had changed. Though he said little, there was weight in his stillness. People sensed it, even if they could not name it. Silence, when rooted in self-respect, carries a quiet authority. He did not seek approval anymore, nor did he fear disapproval. His worth was no longer tied to how others received him. It rested somewhere deeper, somewhere untouched by passing opinions. This understanding gave him peace. In moments of solitude, he reflected on how far he had come, not in distance, but in depth. He saw how anger once asked for release, how sadness demanded expression. Now they visited him gently and left without struggle. There was no bitterness in this growth, no hardening. His heart remained open, but protected. He learned that softness and strength are not opposites. They can exist together, shaping one another in quiet balance. Sometimes he noticed how quickly others exhausted themselves, reacting to every shift around them. He did not judge them. He understood now how easy it is to be pulled outward. He had been there himself. His silence was not superiority, it was refuge. Have you ever felt calm that feels earned? Not given, not borrowed, but grown slowly through patience. That was the calm he carried. It came from choosing restraint again and again, even when reaction felt easier. The strength within him did not need proof. It showed itself in consistency, in how he remained steady when things around him shifted, in how he stayed kind without becoming vulnerable to harm, in how he listened without losing himself. He realized that true power does not rush. It waits, it observes, It knows when to move and when to remain still. And most of the time, it chooses stillness. As the world continued its quiet motion around him, the boy walked forward without hurry. He did not feel the need to be seen or heard. He trusted that what was meant to grow would grow in its own time. This was the strength that made no sound, built from silence, from discipline, from choosing peace over reaction. It lived within him now, steady and reliable, like a deep-rooted tree that does not sway with every passing wind. And though nothing outward had changed, everything inward had. He was no longer defined by what happened to him or by how others perceived him. He was defined by how he held himself. In that quiet strength he found something rare, a sense of dignity that did not depend on recognition, a self-respect that required no defense, and a calm presence that would remain with him no matter what came next. The road he walked was not marked by loud milestones or sudden turns. It unfolded inward, quietly, one step at a time. While the world often measured progress by what could be seen, his growth happened in places no one else looked. It happened in long pauses, in thoughtful silences, in moments when he chose understanding over reaction. He spent more time alone now, not because he was distant, but because solitude had become a place of clarity. In those quiet hours he reflected on his thoughts and feelings, letting them rise and fall without interference. He noticed patterns within himself, habits of emotion, old fears that still lingered, hopes that had softened but not disappeared. Have you ever walked a path where nothing around you seemed to change, yet you knew you were different inside? That was how it felt for him. Outwardly, life moved at its usual pace. Inwardly, something steady was forming, something grounded and patient. He began to understand that discipline was not about company, control, but about care. He treated his inner world gently, knowing when to allow a feeling and when to let it pass. This balance did not come easily. It was learned through attention, through listening carefully to himself without judgment. The quiet no longer felt like an escape. It felt like home. Within it, he could examine his thoughts honestly, without needing to defend or justify them. He learned which voices inside him were shaped by fear and which were shaped by truth. Sometimes memories surfaced unexpectedly. Old moments of pain, of being overlooked or misunderstood. Instead of turning away, he stayed with them. He allowed them to exist without letting them define him. In doing so, their hold weakened. They became part of his story, not the center of it. He noticed that, as his inner world became calmer, his actions followed naturally. He moved with intention, not urgency. He spoke when needed, and stayed silent when words would add little. This was not withdrawal, it was alignment. They still passed by his life, some briefly, some longer. Some noticed his calm and felt at ease. Others found it unsettling. He accepted both reactions without attaching himself to either. He understood now that his journey was not meant to be witnessed or approved by everyone. Have you ever felt growth that felt quiet, almost invisible yet undeniable? He felt it in the way his heart responded more slowly to disturbance, in the way his thoughts returned to balance more easily. In the way he trusted himself to handle whatever arose. This inward journey required patience. There were no shortcuts, no applause, only the steady work of being present with himself day after day. But within that patience he found something rare, a sense of wholeness that did not depend on external outcomes. He realized that restraint was not limitation, it was freedom. By choosing when to act and when to remain still, he preserved his energy for what truly mattered. He no longer felt scattered by every passing emotion or opinion. As time passed, the quiet strength he had cultivated began to shape his life in subtle ways. Decisions felt clearer. Conflicts felt smaller. He trusted his instincts not because they were loud, but because they were consistent. This road inward did not separate him from the world. It connected him to it more honestly. Without the need to perform or react, he could meet others as they were, without losing himself. And though this journey had no clear end, he felt at peace walking it. Each step inward brought him closer to a calm center that remained unchanged by circumstances. In that steady movement toward himself, he discovered a lasting truth. Growth does not always rise upward. Sometimes it settles downward, deep into the roots, where it can support a life built on quiet strength, patience, and self-respect. There came a moment when the boy realized he no longer needed to explain himself. It was not because the world had suddenly become kind, or more attentive. It was because something quieter had taken place. Without effort, without announcement, his silence had begun to speak on his behalf. They noticed it slowly, not all at once, not clearly. At first, it was only a feeling they could not name, a sense that his presence carried a calm they did not expect. He did not interrupt, he did not rush, he did not react in ways they had learned to anticipate, and in that stillness something about him stood apart. Have you ever sensed meaning in someone's quiet, even when no words were offered? That was how it happened. His silence no longer invited assumptions as easily as before. It invited pause. People found themselves thinking twice, listening more carefully, filling the space with fewer careless words. He did nothing to encourage this change. He remained as he had become, observant, steady, present. And yet, his restraint reshaped the space around him. Where there might have been tension, there was now uncertainty. Where there might have been provocation, there was hesitation. They began to understand, without being told, that his quiet was not emptiness. It was depth. It was not weakness. It was control. And control, when held gently, carries weight. Some felt drawn to it. They felt safe in the calm that surrounded him, even if they did not understand why. Others felt unsettled. Silence has a way of revealing what noise can hide, and not everyone is comfortable with that reflection. The boy noticed these changes, but he did not cling to them. He did not measure himself by their reactions. He simply observed, as he always had. The difference now was that observation no longer came from uncertainty but from clarity. He saw how words lost power when they were not answered, how judgments faded when they were not fed, how calm endurance could outlast moments meant to disturb. His silence had become a mirror, quietly reflecting back what was offered. Have you ever realized that being steady can change a room more than speaking ever could? He realized it then, not with pride but with understanding. Silence, when chosen with intention, can guide a moment without controlling it. There were times when someone finally paused and truly looked at him, not searching for a reaction but acknowledging his presence. In those moments, no explanation was needed. The years of restraint, of inward work, spoke clearly enough. He did not feel victorious, he felt complete. The need to be seen had softened, the need to be right had dissolved. What remained was a quiet confidence that rested easily within him. They no longer rushed to define him. Some learned to listen, others stepped back. Either way, the boy did not move from his center. His silence had found its voice, and it did not need sound to be heard. In quiet moments, he reflected on how far he had come, not from one place to another, but from one way of being to another. He remembered the early silence that felt heavy, the misunderstandings that cut deeply, the restraint that once felt like effort. All of it had led here. Now, silence was not something he endured, it was something he trusted. It protected his peace without closing his heart. It allowed others to reveal themselves while keeping him grounded. He understood that not everyone would understand him, and that no longer troubled him. Being understood by the world was no longer his goal. Being aligned with himself was enough. As the quiet settled around him once more, he felt a gentle assurance. He had learned when to speak and, more importantly, when not to. His silence had become his language, shaped by patience, discipline, and self-respect, and in that unspoken language, his life moved forward calmly, steadily, guided not by reaction, but by a deep, enduring stillness that spoke exactly when it needed to, without ever raising its voice.